So there has been this viral trend on the internet lately talking about how detachment is the way to go and is the best thing for relationships. And I'm here today to talk to you about a different perspective on this topic. Because personally, I don't think detachment is the way to healthy relationships. There's something far better that is ideally what we should be striving for a healthy, thriving relationship dynamic. It will improve the self esteem and confidence you have in the relationship to yourself, but it will also maintain the connection and healthy thriving between yourself and others. So, if you're sick and tired of hearing that detachment is the key to a healthy relationship, then today's video will cover a better way to this. So first and foremost, what is detachment? What does this even mean if you're new to this concept? Well, detachment in relationships refers to a state where an individual maintains their emotional boundaries and a sense of independence from their partner or other people involved in any relationship in their life. And it's usually characterized by five major things. The first thing is a sense of emotional independence, really meaning that you don't overly rely on other people for emotional support and try not to rely on them for validation. Number two, strong boundaries. This means establishing and maintaining personal limits in your different interactions. Number three, not being attached to outcomes. In other words, not really thinking too much of the future or trying to gear the relationship a certain direction. Number four, prioritizing yourself and your needs first. And number five, having an objective point of view, which really means being able to look at the relationship with a level head and trying to just be as unbiased as possible. So I'm going to tell you a story here for a moment. I was a fearful avoidant and I did a lot of work to become securely attached. And I was very fearful avoidant and had a lot of challenges to move through. It's a huge part of why you have this channel here today. I can tell you very strongly that emotional independence is not the answer. I spent a lot of time in my early teenage years, adulthood, trying to keep people at arm's length. And as most of you would know, a fearful avoidant attachment style tends to be somebody who really gives to other people and tries to support others, but actually really struggles to be vulnerable enough about the really vulnerable things where they're willing to open themselves up and receive and say what's really going on for them and ask for support. And in fact, I actually grew up feeling very afraid of relying on other people because I was like, well, what if they don't show up? And then I'm just left feeling helpless and trapped. So I spent a lot of my early relationships and times growing up trying to make sure that I never had to rely on anybody for anything. I also spent a lot of time trying to make sure that, I just took care of myself and, didn't let myself get into a space where I would be too vulnerable to anybody else. And what this did in turn is it led me on a string of early relationships in my late teens, early 20s, where I basically would invest in other people and never give myself a chance to really be invested back in because I would always connect with people through, being on my best behavior and never showing any weakness or flaws or any vulnerability. And that led me to constantly feel burnt out by relationships. It led me to feel like my needs were never met in relationships because I was never being vulnerable enough to actually communicate what those needs were so that I could actually receive them from others. And it basically kept my this chip on my shoulder in all of my relationships. It made me feel like, this sense of resentment or almost like a tiny bit of bitterness that, oh, I do all these things for other people and nobody shows up for me to the same degree. And it took me a lot of introspective work and a lot of really radical honesty with myself to realize, oh, I'm not allowing people to support me the way I try to support them because I'm not being vulnerable. I'm not sharing what it is that I need. I'm not truly sharing what it is that I'm experiencing or going through. And so I don't believe in this concept of detachment because that led me to a series of failed relationships. And for anybody who's been watching this channel for a little while now, you know that I spent almost 10 years in client practice, seeing somewhere between 15,000 and 18,000 one-to-one sessions during that time, and have had tens of thousands of people come through our programs at PDS. And I can tell you, my story is not original. This is replicated out time and time again. So, what is the better answer? What is the healthier way of doing this? Well, it is healthy interdependence. dependence. Okay. Interdependence means I know how to meet my needs. I know how to self soothe. I have a healthy relationship to myself and I have a healthy relationship to somebody else. I can also let people in and rely on them simultaneously. It's really being a master of both. I like to think of it this way. I try to be a master of knowing my own needs and having really healthy strategies and habits to meet those needs on a daily basis. As an example, emotional connection is a big thing for me, and so is personal growth. So I know that as needs, when I sit down in meditation in the morning and when I journal in the evening or when I read or learn and self-analyze and introspect, like that meets my need for emotional connection and personal growth. But I do not believe that I should be this simultaneous person meeting that need. So I also communicate my needs for connection. I go out on a date night every week with my husband, no matter what is happening. And, we spend time actually having deep conversations and really talking and sharing about things going on in our lives. And that is also a need for emotional connection. And so, I like to think of interdependency as you can be a master of meeting your own needs and soothing that way, but also of communicating your needs to others and allowing them to be met by and through other people. And this creates this healthy dynamic where it's the best of both worlds. Now, I want to go back through for a second here, those 5 pieces that we talked about of what detachment means. And I actually want to just change them around and tell you a healthier adaptation to this. So, the first part of detachment, if you remember point number one, it was emotional independence, not relying on others for emotional support and validation. I can tell you right now, that's not healthy. And also dismissive avoidance who go out of their way to never rely on people for emotional support or validation. They always end up having to leave relationships because they always end up feeling like they can't really let people in. And so when things get too real, and they're trying to not do this, it's a recipe for sabotaging your life and relationships. So, a healthier adaptation to this would be learning to rely on yourself and others as equally as possible. Okay. You are going to have moments, for example, that somebody's not going to be able to meet your needs because they're overwhelmed or they're stressed or they're going through something. But if you're really good at communicating those needs out to multiple people in healthy ways, but also you have a relationship to yourself where you can meet those needs too, this is what we're really looking for. Number two, healthy boundaries. This is great. Healthy boundaries, I agree with completely. But it shouldn't be boundaries from a place of fear. It should be boundaries from a place of truth. So I don't, for example, set a boundary to keep people away. I would set a boundary in a way that acknowledges and honors my truth so that I can share my authentic self with other people. For example, when we look at the idea of detachment-based boundaries, it's kind of like just keeping people at arm's length, never letting them too far in, versus healthy boundaries would be things like I can let people in and I can share with them in my rawness and my authenticity, like, hey, when you say that to me, that doesn't land that well with me, or I have a fear around this thing. Can you be honest about this, and can we make sure that we have a healthy boundary here? Or hey, speaking to me that way is not acceptable. That doesn't feel good for me. We need to work on that. That's a boundary, but within intimacy, right? You're able to be intimate enough with somebody emotionally, mentally, where you can convey and communicate what it is that you're needing or not needing, or what's okay with you and not, your true yeses and nos. And that's healthy boundary setting, not just like overall just keeping people away from you. Number three, non-attachment to outcomes. That's fine. I think that we don't have to be attached to outcomes. I think that's healthy, but I do think that the second part of this is really that we can still be intentional in our relationships. And I would make sure that if you're listening to this, you're not conflating the two, not having to like hang on to this expectation of exactly what the future should look like is a good thing. Instead, if we're like, okay, so I'm just going to be on autopilot all the time and I'm never going to think about what I want in a partner or what I'm looking for in a friendship, or, I'm building relationships without any intention, that became unhealthy. So we really want that middle ground. And number four, prioritizing your own well-being and needs first. Again, I feel like this can be something that becomes a little bit tricky. I think that the healthiest way to interdependent relationships is the people really close to you. You're taking into consideration both of your needs as equally as possible. So if you have a need and they have a different need, it's not like, oh, my need should just matter first. It's okay, well, let's both share our authentic needs with one another. Let's talk about what that looks like. And then, because we both laid our cards fully on the table openly and fearlessly, we now actually can make healthy compromises somewhere in between. And if we're mindful of, it's okay that we have different needs sometimes, and let's communicate through it and come up with some solutions and strategies, you become a really good communicator. And you also become really good at being able to have both of your needs met, which is a key part to a thriving relationship. And last but not least, viewing the interactions in the relationship with a level head, sure, as long as we're not trying to just intellectualize everything in a relationship, and we're still able to share if we feel upset by something emotionally so we can solve for it, or share what we prefer and don't prefer. And I think if we can really get into a space where we're seeing interdependence as a much healthier and better substitute for detachment, this is where we're going to have secure and thriving relationships. If you want to do a deeper dive into this topic, all about co-regulation and how to be interdependent, I have a full webinar style course on this you can check out, called How to Co-Regulate and Thrive in Closeness, that I will put in the description box down below. You can check it out fully for free, just for a limited time. And that's a part of our attachment bootcamp that we're running right now. So you can always check that out too. Thank you so much for watching. And please, if you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe.